It began with a bank transaction. Silent, unremarkable, nothing that should have reached the upper floors of the CIA. A single deposit, a number too large for a government salary, a number so suspicious that any experienced investigator would have raised an eyebrow. But no one did. Not then, not when it mattered. Because in 1992, the CIA still believed it understood betrayal, still believed treason fit a recognizable pattern, still believed that its enemies came from the outside, from beyond the walls of Langley, from countries and ideologies sworn against the United States. They never imagined the real threat was sitting inside the building, wearing a badge, drinking agency coffee, walking into classified meetings as if he belonged there because he did. His name was Aldrich Ames, a veteran counterintelligence officer. Soft-spoken, unremarkable, a man whose presence rarely drew more than a nod or a passing glance from colleagues. No one looked at him twice, and that was exactly how he wanted it. For years, Ames blended into CIA culture like dust in fluorescent light. His clothes were wrinkled, his posture slouched, his performance evaluations consistently below average. The kind of officer people forget exists the moment they walk away. But under that mask of mediocrity was something far darker. Ambition that had withered into resentment. Frustration sharpened into anger. Debt spiraling into desperation, and a profound bitterness toward the very institution he served. It was this combination, petty grievances mixed with financial ruin, that made Ames vulnerable. And the KGB, the most powerful intelligence service in the Soviet Union, recognized his weakness before anyone in the CIA even noticed he was struggling. On a cold April day in 1985, Ames made a decision that would alter the course of U.S. intelligence for decades. He walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. No disguise, no covert signals, no coded language. Just walked in. A CIA officer, entering the headquarters of America's greatest rival. Inside his briefcase was a stack of classified documents, names, identities, and operations tied to CIA assets operating deep inside the Soviet Union. It was a death list, and he handed it over without hesitation. The KGB knew instantly what they had gained. This wasn't a minor defection. This wasn't a low-level informant. This was someone inside the American intelligence bloodstream. Someone who could give them everything. Ames expected $50,000. They offered $50,000 immediately, and millions more over the years. In that moment, he crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Not only betraying his oath, not only betraying his agency, but condemning CIA agents, real people, to certain death. And yet, when Ames walked out of the embassy, he didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't panic. He simply went home, had dinner with his wife, and returned to work the next morning as if nothing had happened. No one suspected a thing. The mole was inside the CIA, and the clock had begun. Before the world labeled him a traitor, Aldrich Ames was just another second-generation CIA kid. Born into the intelligence world, raised around secrets. A child who watched his father work inside the agency, absorbing the culture long before he understood it. But unlike many of his peers, Ames didn't step into the CIA with fire in his chest or patriotism in his veins. His career began as an accident, a summer internship that turned into a job that turned into a habit, and a habit that fossilized into a life he never truly chose. By the time he became a full-time officer, he was already exhausted, already defeated, already drifting. His early performance reviews described him as capable but unfocused, intelligent intelligent but inconsistent, and not suited for leadership. Not exactly the profile of a rising star. But the CIA isn't a place where every officer needs to shine. Some simply need to exist, quietly, unnoticed. And Ames excelled at being forgettable. Colleagues remembered him as disheveled, often late, often disorganized, often carrying the smell of alcohol. He blended into the background so well that people stopped paying attention, stopped watching, stopped wondering. And that is how a traitor is born, not in fire, but in silence. Despite his poor performance, Ames found himself assigned to highly sensitive counterintelligence posts, simply because no one else wanted them. Work involving the Soviet KGB was notoriously complex, tedious, and mentally draining. But it was also uniquely dangerous. Because the deeper you dig into the enemy's world, the more the enemy notices you. Ames struggled financially. He drank heavily. His first marriage collapsed under the weight of debt and disappointment. He began showing up late, missing deadlines, forgetting tasks. And yet somehow, he stayed employed. Why? Because bureaucracies have blind spots. Because institutions often mistake longevity for loyalty. Because no one imagined mediocrity could hide malice. Ames remarried. His second wife, Rosario, loved luxury. Clothes, jewelry, expensive travel. Ames wanted to give her everything, and in doing so, pushed himself deeper into debt. Credit cards maxed out, loans overdue, bills piling up. He needed money, and he needed it fast. He could have asked for help, could have taken another job, could have sought treatment for his drinking. But he didn't. Because Ames wasn't just drowning financially. He was drowning emotionally. He felt overlooked, underpaid, underappreciated, ignored by the very agency he believed he had devoted his life to. And in that resentment, the KGB found an opening. They didn't need to convince Ames to betray America. Ames had convinced himself. All they had to do was pay him. And once they did, the transformation was instantaneous. He wasn't a struggling officer anymore. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't powerless. He was valuable. More valuable to the KGB than he had ever been to the CIA. Aldrich Ames didn't betray America because he believed in communism. He didn't betray America because he hated it. He betrayed America because he was drowning, and the KGB offered him a lifeline the moment Aldrich Ames walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. He shattered one of the CIA's most sacred assumptions: that no officer would ever voluntarily approach the enemy. For decades, Soviet defections were the CIA's currency. America expected spies to come from Moscow, not the other way around. So when Ames stepped through the embassy doors, the KGB officers inside weren't confused. They weren't cautious. They weren't even surprised. They were prepared. Because in the world of intelligence, desperation is predictable, and Ames was radiating desperation from the moment he entered. According to later KGB files, Ames walked in with the calmness of a man who had already crossed a moral boundary long before he reached the embassy steps. He carried a single briefcase, old, worn, and overstuffed. Inside were documents that would burn through the CIA's Moscow operations like wildfire. When Ames sat down, he didn't whisper. He didn't look around nervously. He didn't stutter. He introduced himself by name. He identified his CIA position. He explained what he could offer. He explained what he wanted. His opening line to the KGB has become infamous in intelligence circles. "I'm offering you the identities of your adversaries." And with that sentence, Ames became the most valuable spy Moscow had seen in years. The KGB officers noted his composure, his confidence, his total lack of hesitation. They expected terror. They found ambition. They expected fear. They found entitlement. They offered him $50,000 on the spot, an amount equal to half his annual CIA salary. Ames didn't flinch. He accepted the cash, stood up, shook their hands, and walked out. No disguise, no covert route, no fear of being followed. Just walked back to his car and drove away. Inside his briefcase, the KGB now possessed names of every CIA asset in Moscow. Sensitive operations in Eastern Europe, identities of Soviet officials secretly cooperating with the US, details of CIA penetration attempts inside the KGB. This was the kind of intelligence the Soviets dreamed of. To them, Ames wasn't a mole. He was a gift, and they protected him like one. The KGB had a long-standing doctrine. If a source brings gold, treat him like a king. Ames brought more than gold. He brought blood. Because within weeks of his first delivery, Moscow began eliminating the CIA's network. CIA assets disappeared. Some were arrested. Others were executed in basements and courtyards. Entire operations collapsed. Inside Langley, panic spread. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Years of work destroyed in months. Trusted agents suddenly silent. Operations compromised without warning. The CIA believed they were under attack. They were right. But they imagined a sophisticated breach. A new KGB technology, a communication leak, a compromised encryption system. They never suspected the truth. The breach was a middle-aged officer who drove a beat-up car, wore cheap glasses, slouched through hallways, and drank too much at agency parties. Aldrich Ames had begun a campaign of betrayal unlike anything the CIA had ever seen. And he was only getting started. What Ames handed the KGB in 1985 didn't just expose CIA operations. It sentenced people to death. Real people, with families, with children, with hopes of freedom or a new life beyond the Iron Curtain. But Ames didn't think about them. Or if he did, the thought didn't slow him down. He had debts to pay, a lifestyle to maintain, a marriage to satisfy, a new identity to build, one funded by Soviet rubles. The KGB's reaction to Ames' first package was swift and brutal. Some CIA assets were arrested within days. Others held out for weeks, unaware that their fate had already been sealed by a man thousands of miles away. The Soviets didn't take chances. They didn't interrogate for long. They didn't negotiate. They executed. Not because they needed to, but because it sent a message to Moscow, to Langley, to every spy operating in the shadows. There is no escape when your name is in the hands of Aldrich Ames. CIA cables from 1985 and 1986 reveal a sudden, chilling pattern. Agents who had reported regularly for years stopped responding. Dead drops remained untouched. Safe houses went dark. The CIA scrambled for explanations. Had their communication lines been intercepted? Was there a technical vulnerability? Had the KGB developed new surveillance tactics? But the truth wasn't technological, it was personal. Ames had personally handed Moscow a list of their identities, a list he maintained as part of his job, a list the CIA entrusted him with, and he sold it for cash. One of the most devastating names on that list was General Dmitry Polyakov, one of the CIA's most valuable assets inside Soviet military intelligence. His contribution shaped US strategic decisions for years. After Ames' betrayal, Polyakov was arrested. He was executed shortly after. Another casualty was Boris Yuzhin, a Soviet KGB officer secretly working with the FBI. He vanished into the prison system, the exact details of his fate never fully confirmed. Ames didn't just betray individuals, he betrayed the foundation of trust that every intelligence network relies on. He destroyed morale. He erased decades of progress. He forced the CIA to question everything it thought it understood about the KGB. Inside Langley, suspicion grew. Fear spread. Careers collapsed under the pressure of being wrongly accused. The CIA launched internal investigations. They examined communications, reviewed surveillance footage, pulled apart operations piece by piece. But Ames had been so effective, so thorough, so precise, that he made others look guilty instead. Several CIA officers were reassigned, some forced into early retirement, others accused of incompetence or negligence. Ames watched it all happen, watched colleagues suffer for his crimes, and he didn't blink. He didn't flinch when news of execution surfaced. He didn't hesitate when the CIA mourned fallen assets. He didn't care when innocent officers were blamed. If anything, the chaos protected him. Because the more confusion Ames created, the safer he became. Every asset executed bought him more time. Every failed investigation reinforced his cover. Every ruined career removed suspicion. He was invisible inside the agency, hidden in plain sight, and his betrayal had only begun. For years, the CIA believed that Aldrich Ames's failures, his drinking, and his sloppy work were signs of a tired officer nearing the end of his usefulness. They had no idea those same habits were hiding millions of dollars in Soviet payments. The KGB wasn't subtle with Ames. They didn't try to disguise their appreciation. They paid him generously, openly, sometimes excessively, because they understood something the CIA didn't. Ames was motivated by lifestyle, by recognition, by material comfort, and they ensured he felt valued. Within months of his first betrayal, Ames began receiving large transfers disguised through foreign banks and covert channels. Money flowed easily, frequently, predictably, and Ames spent it with the same recklessness with which he betrayed his country. He bought a new Jaguar XJ6, an expensive luxury vehicle that stood out sharply against the modest salaries of CIA analysts. He upgraded his wardrobe, tailored Italian suits, high-end shirts, handcrafted shoes. He and his second wife, Rosario, moved into a large, elegant home in Northern Virginia. They traveled constantly to Bogota, to Rome, to the Caribbean, living a lifestyle far beyond the reach of government workers. At CIA headquarters, colleagues noticed the change but wrote it off as inheritance, savings, or Rosario's family money. Others simply assumed Ames was living irresponsibly, accumulating debt he would one day regret. Because no one suspects the mole is the man dressing too well for his job. But the IRS noticed, neighbors noticed, people gossiping in hallways noticed. At first, it all seemed harmless, but over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Something didn't add up. Ames's official salary at the time was modest, even by government standards, and yet his spending was increasing dramatically. His mortgage, his luxury goods, his vacations, his car loans. Financial analysts later calculated that Ames spent over $1.5 million in less than 5 years, without ever receiving a legal windfall. Still, the CIA dismissed him as incompetent, not corrupt. They believed his job performance was too poor for him to be dangerous. Poor performance meant low access. Low access meant low risk. It was the agency's fatal mistake. His sloppy work actually protected him. If anything, it reinforced the idea that he wasn't capable of a sophisticated betrayal. He didn't fit the profile of a master spy. But the KGB never cared about profiles. They cared about access, and Ames had access to everything they needed. By the early 1990s, CIA investigators finally began noticing the mismatch between Ames's lifestyle and his salary. But even then, the investigation took months to start and even longer to reach the right conclusion. Ames believed he was untouchable, and for nearly a decade, he was. He flaunted his wealth openly, not secretly, not subtly, openly. He drove into CIA headquarters in his Jaguar every morning, parked in the employee lot, flashed his badge, and walked into the building as if he deserved every bit of it. Because the truth was simple. Aldrich Ames didn't think he would get caught. Ever. And until the money started exposing what the CIA refused to see, he was right. When CIA assets began disappearing across Moscow in the mid-1980s, the agency responded the way any intelligence organization would. They assumed the problem was technical. They believed their encrypted communication system had been compromised. They believed the KGB had developed new surveillance capabilities. They believed the breach came from missteps in the field, not from betrayal within their own walls. And so the CIA did what bureaucracy does best. It created task forces, held high-level meetings, reviewed thousands of pages of reports, and built theories that pointed everywhere except where the truth lived. Inside Langley, suspicion spread like wildfire. Officers accused one another. Analysts hinted at incompetence. Supervisors pressured teams to re-examine their procedures. The CIA desperately wanted to believe the problem was structural, not human. Because a structural problem can be fixed, a traitor cannot. So the agency blamed technology. They blamed case officers. They blamed compromised tradecraft. They blamed the KGB's growing sophistication. At one point, CIA leadership even considered the possibility that multiple moles were operating simultaneously, because the sheer scale of the damage felt too large for one man. They were half right. The scale was enormous, unprecedented, catastrophic. But it wasn't multiple traitors. It was Aldrich Ames sitting at his desk, drinking cheap wine from a paper cup, and walking home each day with Soviet money in his pockets. Whenever internal investigators reviewed compromised operations, Ames sat in on the meetings. He listened to the theories. He nodded thoughtfully. He even suggested possible explanations. His greatest strength was that no one thought he possessed the skill or the nerve to betray the CIA. His sloppiness protected him. His drinking protected him. His poor performance reviews protected him. In the eyes of the CIA, Ames wasn't capable of doing anything truly significant, so no one imagined he could cause unprecedented destruction. The CIA went after other officers instead. Some of them innocent, some of them brilliant, all of them blindsided by false suspicion. One case officer was reassigned to a low-level post. Another lost his promotion. A third was placed under internal surveillance for months, his career collapsing under pressure. Ames watched silently as these lives fell apart. He wasn't just betraying assets overseas. He was betraying the people sitting next to him in staff meetings. But the greatest tragedy was this. If the CIA had looked inward sooner, if they had followed the logic rather than the fear, if they had examined their own house instead of the enemy's, Ames could have been caught years earlier. Hundreds of lives could have been saved. Millions of dollars in operations could have been preserved. Entire networks could have survived. But the CIA believed moles looked a certain way. Charismatic, brilliant, ideologically driven. Ames was none of those things. He was quiet, messy, invisible, and because he didn't fit the stereotype of a traitor, he operated freely. While the CIA hunted ghosts, the real threat sat inside their own conference rooms, offering suggestions on how to catch himself. By 1986, the CIA's quiet crisis had become impossible to ignore. Too many assets were dying. Too many operations were collapsing. Too many secrets were reaching Moscow long before they should. The agency didn't want to believe a mole existed, but the evidence was stacking higher each month. Still, rather than interrogate high-access officers, the CIA took what they believed was a safer, less confrontational route. They relied on the polygraph, the lie detector, the machine that was supposed to eliminate doubt, eliminate suspicion, eliminate human error. But Aldrich Ames had no fear of the polygraph. He volunteered for it. Not reluctantly, not hesitantly. He volunteered. To the CIA, that made him look innocent. To Ames, it was simply strategy. He understood something the agency refused to accept. Polygraphs don't detect lies. They detect emotion. And Ames had no guilt left to measure. When he entered the small testing room inside Langley, he wasn't nervous. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't imagining the consequences. He was rehearsed. He'd spent hours preparing, controlling his breathing, steadying his pulse, practicing answers. While the examiner attached straps across his chest, placed sensors on his fingertips, and calibrated the machine, Ames sat calmly as if undergoing a routine medical check. The examiner asked baseline questions. Is your name Aldrich Ames? Yes. Do you work for the Central Intelligence Agency? Yes. Have you ever provided classified information to unauthorized individuals? And here Ames smiled slightly. No. The line on the polygraph paper stayed steady, smooth, uneventful. The machine believed him. Because the machine couldn't understand the mind of a traitor. Ames had spent years cultivating a numbness so deep that even his deception felt ordinary. His breathing never changed. His palms never sweated. His heartbeat never spiked. He had rehearsed the answers until his mind felt nothing. And without emotion, the polygraph detected nothing. The examiner cleared him. In his report, he wrote, "No indications of deception." Those words bought Ames another decade of betrayal, another decade of murders, another decade of money flowing in from Moscow. Back at CIA headquarters, the mole investigation shifted away from Ames entirely. He had passed the one test that everyone believed was infallible. And that moment, that single polygraph session, stands today as one of the greatest failures in the history of American counterintelligence. The CIA put its trust in a machine. Ames put his trust in himself, and the machine lost. The KGB later remarked, Ames was the perfect source, not because he was brilliant, but because he was empty. And emptiness is something no machine can measure. In 1986, 1 year after his first betrayal, Aldrich Ames delivered something to the KGB that intelligence historians still consider one of the most destructive acts of espionage ever recorded. He gave Moscow the true identities of every single CIA asset operating inside the Soviet Union. Not some, not most, every single one. It was an intelligence apocalypse. Names, locations, code numbers, secret communications, operational details, recruitment histories, cover mechanisms. Ames handed Moscow the keys to the entire CIA presence in their territory. For the KGB, it was a moment of pure triumph, an unprecedented victory in the silent war of espionage. For the CIA, it was an event so catastrophic that its full consequences weren't understood for years. With Ames's list in hand, the KGB moved swiftly and mercilessly. Agents were arrested systematically, one by one, in a pattern so rapid and precise that the CIA had no way to counter it. Some were interrogated, others were executed immediately. A few simply vanished into the vast Soviet prison system. Ames didn't just betray individuals, he betrayed decades of infiltration. He betrayed the CIA's understanding of the Soviet hierarchy. He betrayed America's entire strategic position in the Cold War. A network that had taken millions of dollars and thousands of hours to build collapsed overnight. Inside Langley, analysts were desperate. They couldn't understand how the Soviets were suddenly anticipating every CIA move, every covert operation, every carefully constructed plan. Nothing made sense. Informants they trusted for years were now silent or dead. Information pipelines that had once been rich with intelligence went completely dry. And because Ames sat in the very department that handled Soviet counterintelligence, he had access to the most sensitive files the CIA possessed. He knew the locations of safe houses. He knew the names of case officers. He knew the signals and dead drop routines. He knew how every major operation functioned. And he sold it all. For money, for comfort, for ego. When the CIA reviewed the damage years later, one conclusion stood above the rest. The CIA never recovered its intelligence network inside the Soviet Union. Think about that. Aldrich Ames didn't just damage the CIA, he broke it. He crippled its ability to operate in the most critical geopolitical arena of the Cold War. Ames later claimed he didn't intend for people to die, that he simply wanted money. But morality means nothing when your decisions write the death sentences of others. The KGB rewarded Ames handsomely for the devastation he delivered. They increased his annual payments, provided financial channels through foreign banks, encouraged him to expand his betrayals. In Soviet intelligence circles, Ames became legendary. A golden source, a crown jewel, the man who had single-handedly torn out the CIA's eyes in Moscow. And in Langley, no one yet knew that the man responsible for the agency's darkest chapter was sitting at a desk inside their own building, still working, still spying, still getting paid, and still completely unsuspected. In the end, it wasn't spycraft that exposed Aldrich Ames. It wasn't surveillance. It wasn't intercepted messages. It wasn't a confession, a slip, or a mistake in tradecraft. It was money. The CIA had always assumed that a traitor would be subtle, that any operative working for the KGB would keep a low profile, avoid lavish spending, live quietly, and hide every trace of foreign income. Ames did the opposite. He flaunted his wealth with the arrogance of a man who believed he was invisible. He upgraded to a luxury home in Northern Virginia, paying in cash where possible. He bought $500 shirts and handmade Italian suits. He purchased a Jaguar sedan, the kind of car CIA officers joked about but could never afford. He went on expensive trips, lavished gifts on his wife, hosted dinners at high-end restaurants, fully renovated his home in ways no government paycheck could justify. Ames was bold, reckless, almost mocking. He believed he had outsmarted everyone. For nearly a decade, he was right. But by the early 1990s, the CIA finally understood something critical. The spy they were hunting wasn't brilliant. He was wealthy. And there were only a handful of CIA officers whose salaries didn't match their lifestyles. Ames was at the top of that list. It began with one investigator, an analyst who noticed that Ames's mortgage, car payments, credit card bills, and spending habits did not align with his income. They ran the numbers twice, then a third time. It didn't add up, not even close. Ames made $69,843 a year, but he was spending like a man earning 3 times that amount. The more investigators examined his history, the more troubling patterns emerged. His bank accounts showed large cash deposits followed by repeated withdrawals. Foreign travel coincided suspiciously with periods of heavy operational losses in Moscow. Credit card payments came from unknown sources. Ames and his wife maintained an affluent social life far beyond what the CIA believed possible. The FBI was quietly brought in. A joint task force was formed. Undercover surveillance began. Agents followed Ames to work, home, the grocery store, restaurants, banks. They watched his routine, his movements, his habits. They noticed something chilling. Every time Ames met with his KGB handlers, his extravagant spending increased. His wife purchased jewelry. Ames bought new clothing. Their home received upgrades. Their bank accounts swelled. It was the financial equivalent of blood in the water. By late 1993, the FBI had built a compelling case. There were no intercepted messages, no secret communications, no physical evidence tying Ames directly to the KGB. But the money told a story no spy could hide. Millions of dollars had flowed into Ames's life without a legitimate source. And in intelligence, unexplained wealth is the loudest confession of all. It was enough. The net was tightening. Ames didn't know it yet, but his time was running out. The money that elevated him was now the money that would destroy him. By 1993, the CIA and FBI were aligned. Aldrich Ames was their prime suspect. But suspicion wasn't enough. They needed proof, real proof, undeniable proof. Proof that would hold in court and expose the largest mole in CIA history. The FBI launched one of the most extensive internal surveillance operations ever conducted on an American intelligence officer. They tapped Ames's home phone, bugged his car, monitored his email, intercepted his mail, reviewed every public financial record they could find. They followed him everywhere, but always from a distance. Ames was a counterintelligence officer. He understood surveillance. He understood how to spot a tail. He understood how to disappear. So the FBI adapted. They rotated surveillance teams constantly, used different cars, staggered distances, employed new tactics to avoid detection. Their goal was simple: catch Ames in the act. They didn't have to wait long. On one particular morning, Ames received a suspicious phone call. Short, coded, unusual. Moments later, he left his home with a bag he normally didn't carry. Agents tailed him. He drove through northern Virginia in erratic patterns, a classic counter-surveillance move. Left turn, right turn, sudden lane changes, unexpected loops, pauses at intersections. He was looking for a tail. He didn't see one. He stopped at a post office, walked inside, dropped something into a mailbox, and left quickly. When agents retrieved the envelope, they found coded intelligence destined for the KGB. This was the breakthrough. Ames was active. Ames was operational. Ames was still spying. But the FBI wanted more. They installed a secret camera overlooking his office desk inside CIA headquarters. It captured Ames drinking heavily, typing reports, opening classified documents, and occasionally slipping folders into his briefcase he had no operational reason to carry home. Every piece of evidence added weight. Every surveillance report tightened the case. Still, the FBI waited. They wanted to catch him during a dead drop, a direct exchange with his KGB handlers. That opportunity came on February 21, 1994. Ames drove toward CIA headquarters, passing the same streets he had driven for years. To him, it was another ordinary morning. To the FBI, it was the day they had been waiting for. The Sting team positioned cars strategically. Agents in plain clothes scattered across the area. The operation was planned down to the minute. As Ames slowed at a red light, FBI vehicles boxed him in. Agents approached from both sides. A badge flashed. A command shouted, "Aldrich Ames, step out of the vehicle." He looked stunned, not terrified, not angry, just surprised, as if he never imagined the consequences would arrive. The man who had betrayed America for nearly a decade was finally in custody. Ames didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't deny anything. He simply said, "You're making a big mistake." But the mistake had been his. The moment he believed he would never get caught, the moment Aldrich Ames sat down in the interrogation room, he understood one thing clearly. It was over. Not because he felt guilt, not because he felt remorse, but because he knew how counterintelligence worked. If they had arrested him, they had evidence. And evidence meant the KGB could no longer protect him. Ames leaned back in his chair, calm, expressionless, almost bored. Across from him sat FBI agents and CIA investigators, men who had spent years hunting a ghost without ever realizing that the ghost had been sitting 2 doors away from them. They expected denial. They expected outrage. They expected some attempt to lie or negotiate. Instead, Ames spoke plainly. "I'm responsible." Just like that. No hesitation, no theatrics, no elaborate explanation, he confessed. And with that confession, the CIA entered one of the darkest internal reckonings in its entire history. Agents who had once worked beside Ames now understood why their operations collapsed. Analysts who had spent years searching for technical failures now realized they had been chasing shadows. Supervisors who trusted Ames now realized he had never deserved that trust. The interrogators pressed him. "Why did you do it? How much did you give them? Who else is compromised? How long has this been going on?" Ames answered with a detached, clinical tone. He told them about his financial problems. He told them about the KGB payments. He told them about the documents he delivered, the identities of CIA assets, the operational details, the safe houses, the recruitment files. He described the betrayal as if he were recounting office paperwork. But what shook investigators the most was not the scale of the damage. It was the simplicity of the motive. Ames didn't betray America because he hated it. He didn't betray it because he loved the Soviet Union. He didn't do it for ideology, revenge, or politics. He did it for money. Plain, simple, cold. When asked if he considered the consequences, the executed agents, the shattered networks, the families destroyed, Ames shrugged. That wasn't my concern. In that moment, every illusion the CIA had about loyalty collapsed. Ames admitted to giving up virtually every CIA asset operating in the Soviet Union. He admitted to compromising so many operations that analysts spent years cataloging the damage. He admitted to continuing espionage even while under financial investigation, even while being surveilled, even while watching colleagues suffer for crimes he committed. His confession was so complete that the FBI later said, "Ames told us everything, not because he felt guilty, but because he wanted to appear cooperative once he realized the game was over." And when the interrogators finally asked whether he regretted anything, Ames leaned forward, looked them directly in the eyes, and said, "My only regret is getting caught." With that single sentence, the room fell silent. This was not a man driven by ideology. This was not a tortured double agent. This was not a conflicted patriot. This was a man who traded lives for comfort. A man who exchanged loyalty for currency. A man who dismantled the CIA's Soviet operations because the price was right. Aldrich Ames had confessed, But the full consequences of his betrayal had only begun. Aldrich Ames was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His wife, Rosario, received a 5-year sentence for her role in handling and spending the money. But the courtroom sentencing was only the beginning of the reckoning. Inside Langley, the CIA began a painful and humiliating process, rebuilding not just networks, not just procedures, not just operational tradecraft, rebuilding trust. Because Ames's betrayal had exposed weaknesses the CIA didn't want to acknowledge. Their vulnerability to insider threats, their overconfidence in the polygraph, their blind spots in financial monitoring, their assumption that mediocrity equals harmlessness. The agency was forced to confront a brutal truth. Ames succeeded for so long because no one believed someone like him could do something so devastating. In the years that followed, the CIA conducted extensive damage assessments. They discovered that more than 30 CIA assets were compromised. At least 10 were executed because of Ames. The CIA's Moscow operations were crippled for years. Intelligence losses cost the US billions. Diplomatic relationships suffered fractures still felt decades later. But the deepest wound was psychological. Ames had sat among them, laughed with them, attended meetings with them, pretended to hunt the very mole that he was. He had exploited the agency's weaknesses, manipulated its systems, and used its trust against itself. Even after his arrest, officers found themselves questioning everything and everyone. Who else could be lying? What other traitors had slipped through? Was the CIA truly in control of the world it claimed to understand? And the answer, whispered quietly in the hallways of Langley, was unsettling. We don't know. To this day, Aldrich Ames remains a symbol of the worst kind of betrayal. The betrayal that comes from within. His actions reshaped CIA counterintelligence. New systems were built, new protocols created. Financial screening tightened, internal surveillance expanded. Psychological evaluations enhanced. The agency learned hard lessons from a man they had underestimated. Decades later, Ames sits in a high-security federal prison. His life reduced to concrete, steel, and memories he no longer controls. But the consequences of his actions still echo across intelligence operations around the world. Every internal audit, every background check, every re-authentication, every mole hunt exists in part because of Aldrich Ames. He didn't just betray the CIA, he reshaped it. Ames once said, "I didn't deserve their trust, but they gave it anyway." And that, more than anything, remains the most painful truth of the entire case. He didn't outsmart them, he didn't overpower them, he didn't defeat them, he simply took advantage of what they refused to see. Aldrich Ames was never a master spy. He was a mirror, reflecting the blind spots of an intelligence empire that believed it could not be fooled, and yet for nearly a decade, it was.